Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. I am Paige Alexander.
And I'm Jamie Morgan Reno. So happy to be here with you, Paige. Our mission at Real Food Recovery is to help empower people to make educated and life renewing decisions that promote physical and emotional health, longevity, vitality, peace, and wholeness. And the best news at Real Food Recovery is we are food plan neutral and always processed food free.
Beautiful. So here we are. We've talked a lot about what addiction is. We found out that, yes, I may have an addiction. So the next natural question becomes, okay, I think I'm addicted. What do I do now? Let's talk about the path to recovery. How do we get out of this? So the first step, usually people are wondering, where do I turn? What do I even do? For me, I knew I had tried everything, but I kept actually, I'm going to take that back. What I tried was weight loss programs, right? And lose the weight, but still you had an issue with food. So that never really worked. It always comes back. The percentages of weight that comes back is like it's close to 100. We might as
Yeah,
well call it 100% and then some.
exactly.
So this figuring out that we have to address the addiction, that it has to be addressed. That
Yeah.
was the last house on the block, hadn't tried that yet. So for me, that's where I had to turn to finally make progress. What about you?
Yeah.
How did you discover where to go, what
Uh,
to do?
Well, I just wanted to actually just take a quick little pause. We had a visitor for episode 6. My dog made a little cameo appearance here. He's given his seal of approval for episode 6 because he's calm enough to lay down and take a nap during our episodes. So thank you
That's
all.
okay.
Thank you, Ollie. But one of the things that I really appreciate is we got feedback from viewers that our suggestion to walk or to move during their listening to our episodes was
Mhm.
something they were starting to do. So
Yeah.
amazing. Not everyone has to curl up in a little circle and go to sleep. So thank you for that viewer feedback. Yeah, I mean, we're talking today about okay, I think I'm addicted. Now what? Right? What do I
Mhm.
do? And for me, I definitely had to get real with myself. I heard this great quote from Lisa TerKeurst, an author that I really appreciate, and she talked a lot about, getting right with yourself and getting real with reality and accepting reality for what it is instead of rejecting or pushing back against it. Um, and so for me, I had to get real with myself. I had to get out of denial, which I spent most of my life living in, and it was modeled for me. And it was, a family of origin trait, right? That denial. And so we mentioned on prior episodes how when I heard I was an addict, I was at first very angry about it. I didn't like that word. I thought that word was really, something that didn't apply to me. But the more I learned about addiction and the more I learned about, as we said, it's not a label. It is an explanation for the way that my body and physiology reacts to those chemicals in those processed foods. It allowed me to remove the stigma of the word addict and to begin to embrace all of the things that came with it. So acceptance was the first step for me.
Ah, that's beautiful. It's interesting that you use the word denial too, because when you were saying that, I thought, I don't know if people have denial or they just think they have a weight problem. I mean, for decades that I just thought I struggled with keeping my weight down. I didn't even know, I didn't even understand what the real problem was. So how can you possibly even know where to begin?
Exactly.
So it kind of leads into our next question or our discussion point about there's so many experts out there. How do you know who to trust? How do you know where to even turn? And I think I've mentioned in here I'll be 60 in August. And I have learned over the years, finally, I need to rely on myself and develop that inner voice of wisdom. I've just been collecting data all this time and turn to other people thinking, well, they must know better than me because they're an expert, right? Now I'm just somebody who's floundering. But as we try all these different things and through failure, we become experts, right, of our own self. And that's the ultimate goal, to get to that level where you feel confident that I know what's best. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I had to learn how to, because I thought, and I love what we talked about as we prepared for this episode. I thought for many years that if it wasn't from outside of me, right, that it didn't have, if it came from inside of me, it didn't have as much value as experts outside of me. That's what I
Mhm.
thought. I thought that experts, or authors or gurus, had something more to offer than my own
Mhm.
internal wisdom,
Mhm.
because I thought I believed the lies that I was told for years, that I wasn't good enough, and I wasn't smart enough, and I wasn't worthy. And so I believed those lies, and I just looked outside of myself for any kind of information, validation, guidance. Um, and I became, very, very easily swayed, by authors and
Yes.
gurus. And that's why I'm really excited that we have an episode coming up, all about how to be your own guru. And I
Mhm.
can't wait for us to dig into this topic, because it's so critical in recovery to learn to connect with yourself. So I had to learn, to trust myself. I had to learn to love myself. I
Mhm.
had to first, that acceptance word had to come into play. I had to learn to accept myself. And I had to learn that, the wisdom of prior generations. If I like to say, if my grandma didn't recognize it as food, and if she wouldn't eat it,
Yeah.
neither do I. And my grandmother was a stickler about particular kinds of food, and eating as close to the land as possible. And that made me really, understand and reflect back on what kind of food should I really be putting in my body, versus what's really just not food at all.
Did she have weight issues?
No,
Interesting.
no,
Yeah.
no.
And the other thing that I wanted to tap into what you just said that I thought was so interesting is you said that you believed everybody else knew better than you, but don't you think that's common? Don't you think everybody thinks, well, they have a
Yes,
book, so they
to-
must know.
totally. Totally.
They're out on a speaking tour, so they certainly know. And that
Exactly.
people just jump from one shiny thing to the next shiny thing to the next because they're looking for the magic pill, right?
Yes. Yes,
Because
the quick
you keep
fix.
yes, you've tried everything, nothing
Exactly.
working, so you just go from one shiny thing to the next, and you're excited about it, and you try it for a few weeks, and then, you're on to something else because because it never
Yeah.
works. So
Exactly, because it's not, it really does and it's not, I'm not discounting the amazing thought leadership that's out there. I'm not
mhm,
discounting, their intentions to help, their intentions to serve, none of that. This is a huge problem, right, in our society.
mhm.
This is the number one pandemic, and it is
Oh, yeah.
ongoing, it is insidious, and it is everywhere, and it is killing people in droves, right? So, when I say this, I mean the effects of the lifestyle disease effects of processed food
Right.
addiction. Okay.
Mhm,
So I don't want to disparage anyone who is, trying to help.
mhm.
All we're trying to talk about in this portion of our episode is to say outside influence, is helpful in giving you direction, but ultimately
Right.
you have to accept where you are, and say, what know yourself well and know yourself best to get the best results.
I agree. I agree, and I just think it takes years of experience and failure to go, "Hey,
Yes,
maybe I've got value in my own thoughts.
that's right.
Let's stop and start looking within. I'm gonna collect this other data and see what they have to say, and let me try it on for size and see how it fits." And it's okay to question what other experts say. So, Anyway, yeah, I love that conversation, which leads to, okay, well then where do I start? What do I do? And for
Yeah.
me, especially when it came to sugar, that was a cold turkey thing. That's not something that I could just start small and lean into. It's a yes or no when it comes to sugar. So for me, I did go cold turkey off the desserts, but other things I have made small changes and kind of leaned into because that really wasn't my drug of choice. So that I just wait for the voice of wisdom to come on for me of when I'm ready to do the next right thing. But when it came for me, where I started was I had to get off sugar, and that actually opened up my recovery for everything else.
Mhm.
What has your experience been?
Well, I tried at the encouragement of professionals that I was working with for years after I had lost, 200 pounds. They were like, "Hey, keep moderating those processed foods. You can have a cake at birthday. Gotta
Yeah.
live. You gotta." And it's not to say that their advice of you have to live and you have to enjoy life wasn't valid. It was very valid, but their advice was directly linked to food, right? It was,
Mhm.
if you're enjoying life, it's because of this food. And that just for me, all that did that moderating of processed food just kept the food monkey on my back for
Mhm.
years. I was and it wasn't even just like a, hey, tap on my shoulder. The food monkey completely controlled my life. It completely controlled my thought process around food, and cravings for it. And so once I realized that, I would white knuckle it. I would just willpower my way, self will propelled through life, to beat myself into change. So I would
Mhm.
say, I can't have this, I can't have that, and I found myself very resentful around food, very resentful about, this metabolism that I had and this body that I had, and all of the weight problem, and all of the family, the genes that I inherited, and all of those
Mhm.
things. Um, and it just burned me out. It just totally burned me out. And once I learned that it wasn't necessarily, yes, I have this combination of this really, really slow metabolism, and the genes from my grandfather's
I
side.
I'm aware.
Oh yeah.
I'm aware.
And I have this, but this amazing, I was working with Dr. Doug Lyle, and he gave me a piece of advice. He said, in a famine situation, you would survive forever. He said you would never have an issue about, because my body just stores things very quickly, naturally. He was like, you would be great. And he's like, and my body is so slow to give it up. So he
Mm.
goes, you're actually a real survivor. He goes, I
Mhm.
know it seems like in our culture today and in our world today, he said that it seems like a huge burden. He said, but actually, if you look at evolution wise, how would you say that?
Evolutionarily,
Evolutionarily speaking, maybe we'll say it that way.
that sounds so good.
Oh, does it?
Say it with confidence and people will just believe
All
you.
right. Evolutionarily speaking, Paige, I'm actually set up for longevity and success. I actually have a desirable metabolism
Okay.
by
Well,
evolution standards.
there is the silver lining. We talk about reframing everything.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
job on reframing a
Yeah.
negative
Ooh.
to the positive.
Yeah, we'll have to do a podcast on reframing, because that's really game changer. But yeah, I finally burned myself out, and being an addict really gave me freedom to say, hey, I don't need to have um I don't need to have this shame anymore. I don't need to have this
Mhm.
burden anymore. I Again, acceptance was that very, very first step, and then freedom of of like, okay, now I've accepted it. Now what can I do?
Yeah. So let's get into that next. But I do want to ask you one quick question about, you talked about how the experts would just push moderation.
Mhm.
Do you think it's ignorance? Do you think it's they just don't understand the food addiction process, and people that have addiction cannot moderate immoderatable foods? You've got to just resist those things. So I don't know if it's lack of understanding, but I hear it all the time.
Yeah, well, I think it's a couple different things. I think the first thing is you have a food industry, a food production industry,
Right. Follow the
that
money.
that exactly that funds the government programs, that create the education programs, that
Mm-hmm.
certify dietitians. So the very people that you don't want to create the messaging for American Dietetics Association
Yeah.
are creating it, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
Coca-Colas, it's the Biscos,
Mm-hmm.
it's really it's the big food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're creating the messaging, and they're the
Mm-hmm.
ones saying, hey, moderate this, have this,
Yeah.
have that cake, have that chocolate bar, have that in moderation. You don't, not realizing that certainly most Americans by statistics don't have the ability to moderate, not
Mm-mm.
because they're broken or wrong or weak. It's because their bodies are acting exactly the way they should act,
Right.
given the pleasure trap that we all live in,
Mm-hmm.
pressure cooker that many of us live in. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it. I think it's a poorly set up system. Is that intentional? I don't know that I'm here to comment on that, but I believe that people have to be very, very wise consumers, and I
Yeah.
mean consumers in every way, right? In every sense of
Yeah.
that word, very wise
Yeah.
consumers.
Yeah. Interesting conversation. So let's talk about so what do we do? So we figured
Yeah.
out we've got the addiction. We went the long way to find what the real root of the problem is.
Yep.
Now that we're older, luckily we have found the problem. So how do we solve it? What does it look like
Mhm.
for recovery? What are the branches of recovery? And we're going to talk about our logo for just a minute. And Jamie, you want to talk about that and why we chose what we chose?
Yeah. So we we were very intentional, Paige and I, when we created our logo. Paige and I have been, we workshopped this, our message and our mission and vision for this podcast. We workshopped it before we even produced anything to bring to you guys, and that was very intentional on our part, because we wanted to make sure that we were bringing the message in the right way to the audience that we wanted to touch. And that really why we, when we thought about how we want to visually represent our podcast and visually represent our methodology, and our own lessons of recovery, it really, the tree of life came to us. We referenced it, it's obviously from the book of Genesis, and it was, one of the first trees mentioned in the Garden of Eden. And this tree of life, the symbolism of the tree of life really connected to Paige and I. And when we look at, like, the image, right, of our podcast logo, you'll see the root system on the bottom. And that root system is really, the internal strength that we all have, but most importantly, our internal why.
Right.
Why do we want, what is it that's driving you to change? Is, where is the pain coming from? Where is, where are the the golden rings, right, down the road in recovery for you? What is your why? If there's a spiritual practice in your life and a spiritual connection in your life, absolutely, that's all part of that root system. For me, my connection to God and my walk with God is absolutely part of my root system. It gives me a lot of strength alongside of my own why, as I understand it. And then we go into the trunk, right? The trunk of the tree. We have the F for food is right over the trunk of that tree. And that is very, very symbolic, because the trunk of that tree is the foundation that brings everything up from the roots and pushes it out to the rest of the tree. So it has to be in real food, has to be grounded in real food. And when we say real food, we are food plan neutral, but we are processed food free. It has to be real food. If your great grandparents or grandparents didn't know what is food, don't eat it. They weren't hopped up on Cheetos, guys. They don't know. And Twinkies, they weren't eating Twinkies. More important,
Twinkies don't grow on trees.
that's right.
Twinkies have never grown on trees. They will
That's right.
never grow on trees.
That's right. And the other part of it too is, okay, we've got the trunk, right? Feeding us in the branches. The branches are all we have chosen some very specific branches. There's 6 of them. Paige, do you want to go through them real quick?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Do you want me to just mention them all, and then we'll go back and take them one by one?
Sure.
I want to say one thing about our why, the root system, the foundation, the depth, the strength in the root system. Why finding your why is so important, because we know as humans our emotions ebb and flow. So if your why is I've got to lose 5 pounds for a party coming up, or what if it's about weight loss, that will change depending on your mood. But if you have a why set in within yourself such that I'm looking for peace, I'm looking for health, I'm looking
That's
for
right.
better relationships, that's a constant. That will always be the same. And you're much more likely to be successful if you
Yeah,
have a strong root system. You'll be able to withstand the winds as they come up.
exactly.
So,
Yes.
okay, I will quickly go over these and then we will just talk about them in depth. So, education, food, movement, spirituality, attitude, and connection to ourself and others. So, you want to just go ahead and start talking about education?
Yeah. So education, and that's something. So when we talk about these branches are really going to, they're informing us on how we bring this content to you. So they're informing us and you on these in Paige and Mai's experience. We have over 100 years in addiction and addiction recovery, guys. 100 years. So a century
Mhm.
of addiction and addiction recovery wisdom to share here. So when
Mhm.
we think about, what education we have, it's certainly not just our own wisdom that we've accrued. Although that's helpful, right? Experience is helpful, but we actually leverage a lot of science because for
Mhm.
us can for us both, understanding the science and how it connects to addiction and the reactions in our bodies to food and the way that it can devolve our lives was really critical to removing the shame, removing the self-judgment and the self-blame and the criticism in my case it was self-hatred, right? I thought that I
Mhm.
was absolutely broken. I thought
Mhm.
there's a million things wrong with me. What is going on? So the science and the education around the way the food is manufactured, the way our bodies process it, and the way our brains react to stress and trauma, all of that comes together. Second, we talked a lot about food, right? After education, we want to talk a lot about food and helping you all create and find your best food list. I'll give you one example. For me, because of my history of obesity and a lot of the ways that I beat up my body for years with processed foods, I find that for me, a whole food plant-based approach works well. I get really inflamed when I eat even small amounts of dairy or animal products. That's me. That's my genetics. That's my experience. That's my the way that my body works. It doesn't mean that I'll be like that forever, but that's how I am today. So that's how I choose to eat. And you've seen in some of our videos and our shorts that Paige does incorporate dairy and animal products. That's what works for her. And
Mhm.
we really want you all to understand that creating your own food list is a very individual thing. There's so many factors that go into it. There's age, there's activity level, there's history, there's metabolism, there's genetics, there's biology, there's if you have medications that you're on. There's a million things,
Mhm.
and we are not here to prescribe to anyone the amount of food, the type of food, the style of food, none of it. We believe in a balanced approach, right? A balanced approach. We're not here to talk about just eating, one food group for the rest of your life, and that's it. But we do want it. We do want a span of whole, fresh food, but we want to make sure that our members understand that food is absolutely critical. Paige, what do you want to say about food?
I want to say one thing about education, and then I'll tell you what
Yeah,
my thoughts are around food. But one of the things that was so critical, and I think almost imperative for me to finally move forward, it was almost the missing link for me, is to understand the education of how the brain works between the frontal lobe and the center brain, and the fight they have between the logic center and the craving center. Once I understood that, I remember driving down the highway and I was listening in on an expert in this field talk about the battle that goes on whenever you get a craving, and that blood flow literally goes back and feeds that limbic system back here to help the addiction thrive.
Mhm.
And she was talking about how, the logic center, braking system, consequence, it's gone. Whoop, gone. And I almost started weeping because it was just the biggest light bulb moment for me ever, that I, like you'd said, I wasn't broken. I was reacting normally
Yes.
to what the situation was. For me, one of my biggest triggers is boredom. If I have any downtime, this addiction center, because I'm uncomfortable when I'm bored, it turns on like a crazy person. But now that I have that awareness and that education, it sets me up to protect myself because now I know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I just wanted to say that for me, that education was such a key component,
Yes.
probably equally to the food. And for me, the biggest part of food for me in my recovery, and I am a freak when it comes to food prep. I will
Mhm.
stay up late to make sure it's done so that I know that I can be safe the next day. I
Right.
have it ready. I think about my grocery list. Today is a Tuesday. I'm already starting to think about, okay,
Oh,
what
yeah.
are we going to do next week?
That's right.
What I will start making a plan. And sometimes I ask my husband on Tuesday, what do you want for dinner on Sunday?
I do the same thing. I'm a planner. My husband says
It's
the same.
time. We cannot goof
Mhm.
around here. We've got to make a plan. So yes, I'm with you. I cannot get into the processed food unless I'm wanting trouble on my hands. So sugar-free for sure. That's a
Mhm.
non-negotiable in my recovery. But as you said, sticking to the whole foods for me,
Yeah.
dairy doesn't give me too much of a problem. I have
Yeah.
a minimal amount of that, and meat. I did keto for a long time, but you know what? I love apples.
Yeah. Right.
Why would I do that? If I want an apple, there's nothing wrong with an
Yeah.
apple.
Yeah.
So,
Fresh fruit's amazing. I don't
yeah.
want to live without fresh fruit.
Mhm. So I've learned so much from my failures, and I always love when people are trying new things because it's just data collection. So for me,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's my food. Let's see, movement. You want to start out talking about movement, or
Go
do you
for
want
it.
me to?
Go for it.
Okay, so I am an avid exerciser. I sometimes have to reel myself in, but I have got to have it for my mental health and to burn off some of this extra energy that I carry around with me all day long. So, 5 to 6 days a week, I am doing something. And so I need the endorphins. It makes me feel good.
Mhm.
I like the muscle tone in my body, and we do what we do for how we feel after. You do not have to be like me where I'm hitting the gym and hitting the weights and hitting the interval trainings on the cardio. You do not have to do that.
No.
The only thing, if you want benefits, just take a walk. And I'm sure studies will show that
Yes.
people that walk just live as long or longer than
Longer.
anybody else.
There
Yeah, I think
are
my
studies and they're amazing. Yeah.
I think our cardiologist told my husband that just walkers live
Mhm.
longer. So find a friend. Most of all, find something you enjoy because
Yeah.
it will increase your commitment to doing
Yes.
it. Listen to our podcast whenever you're out walking or whatever you're doing, but finding something you enjoy and just doing a little bit of movement every day. Some people, even on their day off, and I'll let you talk about that, Jamie, like to do a little bit of movement. But for me, it's a huge part of my mental health. And, when you go to the gym and, or if you work out at home and take care of yourself, for me, it kind of encourages you just to take care of yourself nutritionally as well.
That's
So
right. That's right.
I think it keeps me off of it. It is my antidepressant.
Yes.
The exercise is my antidepressant. So
Exactly.
what are your thoughts and feelings around?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more about exercise, movement in general. Movement for me is not for my weight management. It's for my health. It's for my mental
Mhm.
health. It's for my overall well-being. I do have a lot of, excess cortisol and energy when I wake up in the morning. Not really energy per se, but anxiety, with tension. When I
Mm-hmm.
wake up in the morning, I have that 4 a.m., 5 a.m. cortisol,
Mm-hmm.
which is indicative of where I am in life in my 40s. But I've had it for a long time. And until I learned how to channel that early morning, cortisol spike, I channel it now into movement, and I feel just immensely better. I sleep better. I process my thoughts better. And of course, I'm just able to be focused and calmer throughout the day, because I don't have that I've gotten something accomplished, but I've also burned off some of that excess cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing for movement is no gym, no problem. I was a couch potato for many, many years until my early 30s. I mean, really, like I gym class was like a punishment to me. Running the mile was like the worst day of the year. It was horrible, horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of bullying going on for me in gym class. Last kid picked. There was lots of stuff going on
Mm-hmm.
there. So it wasn't just like, oh, I didn't like to move. It was really just because I didn't want to call attention to my body. And then once I started to lose the weight, I knew that I had to move to kind of realize all the other benefits of what I was trying to do. So I started working out probably 2008, 9, being intentional, right? Getting, bike rides and movement. And then I started to really, I got bit by the bug, right? But bit by the fitness bug.
Mm-hmm.
My pendulum swung a little too much to one side for a while, unfortunately, with some extreme workout behaviors, and we'll talk about that in future episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm so happy to say that I have such balance around fitness and movement. I incorporate it every day. It's part of it. I think making my bed, brushing my teeth, getting
Right.
ready, taking a shower, moving my body. It's just one of those things I do every day. Even on the off days, I just had a short about days of rest. For me,
Mm-hmm.
on Sundays after church, I come home and I just walk. I turn on some guilty pleasure TV, and I just walk on my treadmill, or I'll walk outside if it's nice. And I really just I love that. It's wonderful for my head.
I love what you said about it's part of your routine. And I just heard this statement earlier today. The secret of your future is in your daily routine.
That's right.
And let me say that please understand that even though Jamie and I are avid exercisers, 5 minutes of walking a day is
Absolutely.
great. You start where you are.
Absolutely.
Please do not just go
No,
full force. You will
no,
regret it, and you will be
no,
sore, and
no.
you will injure
And you
yourself.
won't stick to it. I know when I started
Yeah.
out, it was walking. I was
Hmm.
450 pounds. I started out walking. Then I chose to ride a bike that could support my weight. Then the more I moved, the better I felt. And it did aid in my weight loss back then, because I had so much weight to lose. And now I have to be really strategic about how I move. And every day is not a all out crazy,
Yes.
you know, man, Katie bar the door kind of day.
Hmm.
In my workouts, I transferred from a gym setting for years. I had a gym community I loved. I transferred to a home gym setting, and that was a learning curve for me. And I'm loving what I do. I incorporate a Peloton bike in the Peloton community. That helps me a lot. But
Hmm.
that's my journey. And everyone's different. And I didn't get there till I was ready to get there.
Right. Yeah. I can't wait till we do our podcast on exercise because there's a
Yeah.
lot to talk
There's so
about.
much to say.
So, our next pillar or our next branch of our tree is spirituality. I will say I start out every day. I'm a highly spiritual person. I connect with my higher power through prayer and seeking guidance through scriptures, as well as listening to uplifting talks. I usually do that while I'm getting my makeup on. I can
Yes.
listen to something, so I learn how to fit it in. Why do I do that? Because it's important to me,
Yes.
because the ultimate goal for me is searching for that inner peace and calm. And that's just an important component for me. And whatever your spirituality looks like, we're not here pushing religion.
No.
Spirituality is different. It's that place where you go to for peace and calm.
Mhm.
That's just what it looks like for me in my days. Some days are a little different, but in general, I usually start out my day on a spiritual note. What about you, Jamie?
Yeah, I absolutely same here. And I actually have the same morning routine. My routine is first get out of bed, and what gets me out of bed. It's usually a negotiation process with me and my alarm clock. What gets me out of bed is knowing that I can listen to a talk or a speaker or a sermon or something that aligns to my spiritual goals. I have a very close relationship with God, but that wasn't always today, but that wasn't always the case. For years, I was an atheist. For years, I
Oh,
didn't
wow.
believe, and it wasn't about religion. It initially it was because I thought religion represented spirituality. And once I learned that it really didn't, that it was a very personal journey, I began to make that journey, and I found my way back to a spiritual practice and a walk with God that's very fulfilling to me. So Paige and I involve spirituality in our branches. We had to include it because for everyone that we've seen that has lifelong recovery, their connection to a spiritual practice that fulfills them. And
Right.
I'm not here, we are not pushing any particular religion at all, but a spiritual practice that fulfills them seems to be, from a personal perspective, seems to be a crucial component to recovery success. Where do you go? I spent years going to me or go, which of course we know how that went. And I spent years going to others for advice and ignoring this spiritual voice that was inside of me, this
Mhm.
wisdom that I had, and this connection to this universal source of love and peace. And I ignored that, and it was to my detriment. And only when I can get out of my own way and connect to a spiritual practice that I really thrive in recovery.
Beautiful. I agree. We've got a couple more and then we're going to finish up here. But
Yeah.
attitude, we learn to reframe the negative to the positive.
Yes.
And we're going to do a whole segment on attitude and how it literally affects every element of your life. Do you want to say much more about attitude?
Couldn't agree more. Reframing is key, and mindset is absolutely key.
Hmm.
I A big part of recovery for me has been about reframing thoughts and reworking mindsets.
Yeah, and I love when we talk about how our brain only knows what we tell it. You could just
Yes,
sit here in your chair right now and go, "I have a stomach ache. I have a stomach ache. I have a stomach ache," and it would happen.
and it would
You
happen.
could, or you could just say, "I feel great. I'm ready to take on the day. I'm ready to learn new things." And just enjoy life. And I'm grateful for the sunshine. Just attitude only does it affect you, oh my gosh, it affects everybody around you. You've been around those people that are just negative Nellies.
I've
Oof.
been one of those people.
Oh,
When I was in the food, I was one of those people.
and you couldn't even get away from yourself, could you?
No,
Everywhere you went, there you
nope.
were.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Yeah, I agree. I agree. How about connection?
Connection to self and others. So this is so interesting to me because I feel like until you are in a position to where that food addiction can quiet down a little bit, you really don't have that opportunity to tap into who you really are.
Mhm.
And when you get the processed food out of your life, it takes up a lot of your time. You don't realize it, but it's just a huge time sucker in as far as your brain, your thoughts, organizing the addiction organizes itself throughout your day. But you have an opportunity to discover what are my interests? What do I like? Who do I like? I can have these relationships that I never had because I'm present, I'm available. I really wasn't available before because we know that um, isolation, addiction invites isolation. We know that connection is the opposite of addiction.
Yes.
So the addiction really drives you to isolate because a lot of the habits that you're doing throughout the day you cannot perform comfortably around other people. So for me, that's where I feel like the greatest opportunity of
Yeah.
getting off processed foods is having the chance to discover who you really are.
Hmm. Yeah. I agree. My addiction thrived in isolation. My addiction constantly, told me to isolate or to say no to those invitations or say no to this opportunity to be out connecting with family or with others. And one of the biggest boosts for my recovery was, I spent 5 years living very close to family in New Jersey where I grew up. And it really helped me get out of that isolation, get out of that routine of just isolating or being by myself with the food. And even when I was not in the food anymore, it was just more critical for me to connect with others. And, there's been so many studies about Alcoholics Anonymous and good and bad and whatever, people think about AA. They never discount the reason that so many people succeed in AA is because of the community that it fosters.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we wanted to make sure, we've heard this amazing speaker, thought leader Johann Hari talk about connection is the antidote for addiction. Connection is the opposite of addiction. And I would totally agree. For me, connection to others helps immensely, but connection to myself was critical. I spent so many years, 40 years of my life pushing my true self away and punishing and criticizing and rejecting my true self and abandoning all of these parts of me. So reparenting work, something we'll talk about as we move through our podcast journey, but the reparenting work, connecting to self, has been a game changer.
Yeah, I love that. And that's kind of a great note to even end on. But we do want to say these are our branches. We looked long and hard about what we think is important for a strong
That's right.
foundation in a life. You may have more. You may have more hobby branches. You may have more relationship branches. Whatever that looks like, you get to design your own tree. But we think these elements are critical for a solid foundation and a good life. We want you to experience things that invite these feel-good neurotransmitters to gently rise and gently fall throughout the day versus the sharp dopamine spikes that come from the grips of addiction. So think about your tree. If you have other branches that you think need to go on your tree, send us comments. We'd love to hear what that would look like for you. So any other
Agreed.
thoughts that you want to end with?
Yeah, recovery is an intensely personal journey. And that's
Mhm.
why for us, these branches, are non-negotiable in our experience and in the experience of
Mhm.
the communities we're part of. But again, you might have another branch or two that you really feel like need to be part of your journey. And we honor that, just like we honor whatever food needs to be part, real whole fresh food needs to be part of your journey. We honor that. Because there are foundations of recovery that are true for all, but there's not just one way to recover. It's a
Right.
very, very personal journey.
I agree. Well, okay, enough said. Good episode, and stay tuned for episode 7. We are going to be talking about be your own guru. You know how in the beginning we talked a little bit about learning to trust yourself? We're going to get you there. You're going to like this episode about be your own guru.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I'm looking
Uh,
forward to it as always.
all right. Bye, guys. Thanks.
Take
See you
care.
around.
See you next time.